So, a gallbladder attack can be one of the worst pains that a client could experience. So, you really want to understand how to explain this to clients and help them understand what forms gallstones and ways to avoid that, because that type of pain can be a huge motivation to take a lot of right steps to really improve their health. Let's jump in.
TC Hale is not a doctor and does not claim to be a doctor licensed in any type of medical field. Don't be an idiot and use anything heard on the show as medical advice. This information should be used for educational purposes only, and you should contact your doctor for any medical advice. Now get off me.
So the liver makes this soapy substance called bile, and we use that bile for a lot of purposes, and that bile is stored in the gallbladder, but it's also concentrated there. And that's the really big deal that we're going to talk a lot about today, because the fact that the gallbladder concentrates the bile makes that bile more effective. So it can be more effective at helping us emulsify our fats and break those fats down so that the body can actually use those. That's a really big deal. The bile is also crucial for helping us detoxify correctly. The liver filters out toxins and puts that in the bile, and then the bile can move through the intestinal tract and go out the back door with those toxins leaving the body. So that's a really big aspect. So bile is very important, but the problem is that when we make mistakes, and there's a lot of mistakes that a client can make, it can thicken up that bile so that it doesn't flow correctly. And when it's not flowing correctly, it just sits in the gallbladder and it continues to concentrate. Remember that the gallbladder is made to concentrate that bile. So if it's just not moving through there like it should, it's going to continue to concentrate. The gallbladder doesn't have a switch for, hey, let's not concentrate right now. It's been here for a while. No, it just keeps concentrating it, and it will eventually concentrate that bile until it turns into stones. And that's kind of how we get those gallstones. So the big mistakes that clients seem to make that can magnify this problem or create it in the first place, the first one would be a low-fat diet. Because remember that when we consume dietary fats, the body calls on the gallbladder to squeeze bile down onto there and help us emulsify and break down those fats. So if we're not eating a lot of dietary fats, the gallbladder is not getting called on a lot. And then bile is not moving through there as often as it should. And then it's going to stay in there and it's going to become too thick and sticky as it gets too concentrated. And then we're going to have all those problems. So a low-fat diet is a big mistake, and we know that was a big mistake now, but there's still people that are catching up on that. We see a lot of clients that are like, man, I'm doing everything right, I'm not eating any fat, and I still can't lose weight, and you just kind of want to shake them a little bit, and you're like, yeah, we don't do that anymore. We know that's a mistake. But a lot of people are 20, 30 years behind. It takes a lot of time for new information to meet the mainstream. So a lot of people are still eating low-fat, and they're not calling on the gallbladder to do its job. Another problem that can really thicken up the bile is eating too many grains or processed foods. And this is pretty much every client that's coming to us. They're all, in a hurry, and they're eating this processed junk, and it's thickening up the bile so it doesn't flow correctly. Now, this next group of mistakes that people make, I'm going to group together. And that's calorie restriction diets, females that maybe have had too many babies, and not that that's a mistake, but it can be problematic, and people that are over 40. And the reason that I kind of clump those together is that these are all issues that can raise estrogen to levels that are a little bit too high. So a calorie restriction diet can do this by not giving the body the resources that it needs. And when the body is not getting what it needs, it'll call on the, hey, adrenals, can you help me out? And can you jack up some hormone levels that can help my body function like it's supposed to function? And if you can jack those hormone levels up, then I can get some things working even though I'm not getting the resources that I need. So a calorie restriction diet is a great way to stress your body out. It's like your body's trying to pay $800 worth of bills with $12. That's a stressful situation. So when we raise these stress hormones, estrogen can go too high, and it appears that estrogen, when it's too high, has the ability to thicken up our bile so it doesn't flow correctly. So that's a big problem. Now, when we have a baby, the female gives all of her resources to build this human. It takes a lot of resources to build a person. It's not just magic. So a lot of her reserves and a lot of her resources will go towards building this human being, and it kind of strips her of all the stuff that she had built up. So if a woman starts shooting out babies left and right, then she's going to be really losing a lot of resources which can cause the body to raise stress hormones very frequently, which can make those estrogen levels too high. And a person over 40, when we start to age, our digestive ability seems to diminish, and we also start to accumulate toxins or chronic infections, and all these problems that can also raise stress hormones. So all of these things can be raising stress hormones that's thickening up the bile and restricting its ability to flow. And there's a lot of other ways that estrogen can go high. A person could be consuming too many estrogenic foods like soy. You got to help clients understand why soy can be so problematic, and it's not this health food that we thought it was 30 years ago. High insulin levels can also thicken up the bile, and that can be why we often see poor bile flow with so many type 2 diabetic clients. It could be that insulin is creating inflammation or thickening up the bile so that it can't move as well. And a catabolic imbalance can also thicken up the bile so it doesn't flow correctly. And we see a lot of people that are leaning too far on that catabolic side, which is the body's breakdown side, and they're not moving as much into the anabolic rebuild and repair side at night like they're supposed to. Now, if you don't know what I'm talking about here, we teach how to look at different imbalances in our clients that can help us understand why they may be dealing with the issues that they're dealing with. So I'll put a link in the description below so you can download my book for free and get an understanding of what we're talking about with these imbalances. My book, Health Pro Results, will walk you through understanding how to do all of those kind of tests with clients and understand those different imbalances. But a catabolic imbalance can be very problematic and can thicken up the bile so it's not flowing. And if it's not flowing, we know it's going to get too concentrated over time and can lead to those gallstones. Now, if a client has been dealing with any of these issues or they appear to have poor bile flow, you really got to take some aggressive steps to get that bile thinned out so that it can flow correctly, because it's the flow of bile through the gallbladder that will start to help kind of disintegrate any stones that are in there. And you may see clients that they could have really big stones in there, and you're going to have a hard time getting that to thin down, and there's a high chance that they could end up having to have their gallbladder removed just because the stones are so large and have been in there for so long. So it does happen, but if you can get the bile thin and moving better, then that movement can start to help these stones start to disintegrate a little bit. Now, there are steps you can take to magnify that as well. You'll hear a lot of people in the natural world talking about malic acid having the ability to melt down gallstones, and so they'll tell people to drink a lot of apple juice because apple juice has malic acid in it. But apple juice is always also going to have a lot of sugar, which could raise insulin level, and if someone is already leaning on that insulin resistant side, then making insulin too high too often can thicken up the bile, so you're kind of making things worse while you're trying to make them better. So we'll often use magnesium malate because that contains a lot of malic acid, and that can help melt down those stones. But you need to understand bio-individuality a little bit before you can tell a client to start taking a whole bunch of magnesium, or it's going to push them too far on the catabolic side and magnify that imbalance and all the problems that can come with that. Could also loosen up their stool and create a diarrhea issue, which we don't want to do because that makes it so that the body can't assimilate nutrients. So these steps can be very helpful if you use them with the right person. Now, there's one other thing that you need to understand when you help a client start to thin their bile if they already have stones in the gallbladder. Because if there's stones in there and they're just kind of wedged in this sludgy, thicked up bile that's not moving, then they probably aren't going to cause a lot of problems. But if the bile starts to move and thin out, which you really want, the client wants that, because if they don't correct the problem, poor bile flow is going to lead to a wide variety of health issues, and some of them can be quite severe. So they need to get the bile moving, but once you start to thin that bile so that it moves, that means the stones might start moving around a little bit, which means that they could move around and get stuck in a bile duct and block that bile duct off completely and basically create a gallbladder attack. That's what creates a gallbladder attack, is when a stone or something blocks a duct so that it can't the bile can't move, and so when the gallbladder starts to squeeze to have the bile move, it doesn't move and it creates a severely painful situation. So you just need to help clients understand that. Now there was a solution that we used for gallbladder attacks, 100 years ago or so. When you went to the store and you bought a carton of Epsom salt, it had a little remedy right there printed on the Epsom salt container that said, hey, you can take a tablespoon of this Epsom salt and a little bit of water to relieve a gallbladder attack. And the reason they believe that that would work is because the Epsom salt has a way of really forcing everything through the gallbladder and pushing stuff through, and it can push a stone through. So people still use that some today, and that's a possibility. But using a lot of Epsom salt like that is also very likely to create a major diarrhea episode. So you want to help people understand that if they're going to do that, if they're going to choose to do that, that they could create diarrhea for that day. And that might be better than dealing with the pain that comes with a gallbladder attack, but it's nice for them to understand that, that can push a person so catabolic that they're going to create a major diarrhea issue. But the main goal is to get the bile moving. It needs to be thinned out so that it can flow correctly, start to disintegrate those stones. And if bile wasn't flowing, they're going to improve a whole lot of health issues just by getting the bile moving. It's going to be easier for them to lose weight. If their blood pressure's high, it can bring it down. They're going to digest fats better. They're going to digest all of their food better and have the ability to break the food down and pull all the nutrients out of that food. It's a really big deal. So that's going to be your first step when helping a client past any type of gallbladder issues. So for now, just watch our video on 5 steps that can help clients get their bile moving. I can't wait to hear about your results.